So we have planned like some interviews, some discussions, particularly around alternative or fringe healing.
Hmm.
That's one way to call it. So yeah, I just wanted to talk to you because we've had some encounters in real life and also virtual that to me have been impactful. And I think your way of life and also way of doing practice is fringe and also kind of alternative, but I think very powerful.
Hmm.
Um, and I would love to hear more about you, your practice, your life, and just kind of see where we go.
Hmm. I don't think I've ever been called fringe before.
Fringe.
Like, does this call for a flapper dress?
That's you.
You
You're
want me to
fringe.
just you want me to just riff?
Yeah, let's riff.
Okay. So, I guess I would say that the way that I like to practice is to look at someone and one, look for what they're not showing. Look for what's not obvious in the way that they're showing up. Look for what's left out in the way that they're showing up in terms of what they're embodying. And two, to look for in my sense of it when I see them, like what is the most beautiful, full, like enlivened, invigorated person that they could be? Like what would be my greatest aspiration for them? Not so much like what I want for them, but in seeing like their skills and their abilities and the kinds of things that they like to dance with and that they like to look at. Like based on all of that, like how amazing could their life be? Or
Mm,
like what could they embody or bring into their experience that would like bring them closer to that aspiration?
mm,
So those are like two common lenses I take on, both what's not there, what's not showing up, because usually that's the shadow material, that's what's being hidden, what's being kept below the surface.
mm,
And it's really powerful to bring that to the light because otherwise either like you use it to make yourself unhappy or you do weird things with it, or you make other people very unhappy with it. Like it's like classic with anger, like those of us who tend to keep our anger down and then we do weird things with it, like we'll just smolder and just like really low key try to like, burn people, or it'll just like all spurt out all of a sudden when we can't handle it anymore. So like
yeah.
with that example, if like anger is in that shadow space, like some of the spaces that I hold are like trying to create the permission and the room to like intentionally practice something like that. Like, how do I actually express my anger
Mm,
so I can do it in a constructive way? So that I can know that it's safe for me to feel anger and that I can practice with people who are like, yeah, it's fine if you do this. And I can like retrain my relational sense of like how I can use anger in a healthy way to set boundaries, to assert myself, to stand for what needs to be protected, which are like very important roles for anger. And if you're not bringing your anger out, then often you won't do those things. You won't stand for what needs to be protected. You won't set the boundaries that would actually like enhance and enliven your own and other people's lives.
mm.
So it's kind of a simple and relatively common example.
Yeah. No, I love what you're saying. And I mean, I certainly see that in my line of work is the things that we deny in ourselves. I mean, obviously don't actually go anywhere. They don't disappear, but they show up in weird ways. I love it. I love
Mhm,
that's how you're
mhm,
phrasing it because it is weird. There's something weird about the way it
mhm,
shows up. There's
mhm,
something kind of like twisted and
mhm,
energetically in our own lives. We kind of know it's like
mhm,
that's weird. Like I shouldn't have
mhm,
done that.
mhm,
And I like your approach of actually bringing it into the light
mhm,
and not in a sense by liberating just the fullness of what is under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing in your practice just how that actually opens up the energies
Mm-hmm.
so that they're conscious
Mm-hmm.
and they don't get acted out in these weird ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one specific thing about your approach that I've been kind of just encountering is the emphasis on, I don't know if desire is the right word, but like life energy or just like what
Mm-hmm.
we most truly want
Mm-hmm.
and not letting that leave the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think sometimes in therapeutic modalities or any kind of healing modalities, if they do work with shadow type material, it can kind of be the main focus. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming to you with this pathology of mine. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can't stop yelling at people. Like I get so
Mm-hmm.
mad and I want to fix that
Mm-hmm.
thing rather than seeing like, well, what is the actual desire and aliveness
Mm-hmm.
that is underneath it that's
Mm-hmm.
not actually being allowed to have
Mm-hmm.
like your full, beautiful, embodied
Mm-hmm.
flow, experience through. And so I'm curious if
Mm-hmm.
you could say more about that because I was kind of inspired by that when I saw you work,
Yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, it's funny actually that you bring this up because I wasn't aware prior to this of where that came from. And as you asked me that, I immediately became aware of where that came from. And where it came from was that there were two really big things in my life in college that I got myself over. One of them was having an eating disorder, and one of them was smoking cigarettes. And there were like years that I was trying to like get over those things. So I was trying to like get myself over the mess of this eating disorder
Mm,
and get myself like over the mess of like smoking cigarettes.
hmm
And like the thing in the end that got me out of both of those separately and independently was like what I wanted more than I wanted that.
mm, mm,
And for me personally, what that was is the sense like I've always been very active. Like I've always like played sports and just loved using my body. Like I did gymnastics like all growing up. And after that I did acro yoga and now I mostly dance. But I've always loved being able to use my body. And I all of a sudden became very aware of how both my eating disorder and smoking cigarettes were going to impact that. And not like in an intellectual way, like there was this way I remember like very distinctly, like I was out running and I felt this like very slight difference in my lungs. And it felt like to me it was like from smoking. And like in that moment of feeling both like the desire to spend my life being very active and like the impact of smoking very viscerally, like that was the thing that in the end like gave me the motivation, the energy, the like driving force to like do what I needed to do to like crush this out of my life, just to stop,
wow.
you know? And I had like tried, but I've been trying kind of like more feebly, because like most of me was not actually invested in making the change. And so it was like in both of those cases, like the desire was like absolutely crucial. Like I wouldn't have been able to do it without that because it like gave me the energy and the drive to actually do what it took to end it. Because it's not actually like a logistical problem, At least in my
Yeah.
sense, it was a motivational challenge. And so
Yeah.
I found my motivation. And after that, I was like, yeah, like it's not just like it all ended in a day, but like my trajectory was clear and I did it. And I
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
have done it without that desire. And so I
Mm,
use it in more nuanced ways now because it's not so much about my physical health at this point,
hmm
but it just, I don't know, like that's what drives me. And we all have such beautiful desires, like for ourselves and other people, and we can like use those.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so curious how you have like four different questions, but I'm going to stick with one. And I'm curious how you tapped into that desire. It's not, you said it wasn't quite intellectual. It was a bit more embodied. That's what I'm hearing. There's a viscerality to it that pushed you with more force than the old patterns, cigarettes and eating disorder. It sounds like
Mhm.
the desire somehow had more like oomph to it. It had more fire.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, how did that happen? Like how did you get in touch with that?
It was just like one of those things that happen. Like I
Yeah.
remember with the eating disorder, I remember sitting at my desk my freshman year, and there was just this moment when I realized that I was just I was just sitting at my desk doing something.
Hmm.
Like it wasn't I always wish that I had more help during that time, that like I was in therapy or like someone was like guiding me, and I didn't have any help during that time.
Hmm.
And I have no idea. I have no idea where I maybe I can just call it grace for now. But because of that, like one of the main things that I do with people is I call to their desire. And I
Yeah.
and I ask for their desire. And I know I did this with you, like when we were like when we've like worked together, when we've like explored this territory together, like to really like own up and like feel like what do I actually want? And so a
Yeah.
lot of the work that I do is like calling to that and making it bigger because often it isn't big enough.
What isn't big enough?
The desire, either the
Yeah.
awareness
Yeah.
of the desire or
Awareness of
like
the
this your
yeah.
awareness of the strength of it.
Yeah.
And so if you make it large enough in your own experience and you really own that, like what you want,
Yeah.
then you have to own up to like whether or not what you're doing is in line with that. But I think that's why so much of what I do is like stoking the flames of that.
Yeah, and I see that's
Yeah.
why the shadow work is so necessary. It's because when you do kind of poke people in that way of,
Mhm.
poking in the service of actually bringing
Mhm.
awareness to the desire that in my experience, people like they know on a
Somewhere,
certain level, like what
somewhere
matters
in you.
most.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then when you poke that, all of the ways in which we have defended against our own desire and our own life energy, if you want to call it that,
Mhm.
those arise. All the ways in
Mhm.
which we've had to defend against it.
Mhm.
And I've seen that as shadow, but I'm curious
Mhm.
if that's how you see it.
Mm, no, I don't know if that's what I would call shadow. I'm also just like, I wish I had a better answer for you about like the sense of like, how did this happen for me?
Mm,
And like, I feel like the only thing that I can give you in it is like, there was some level of viscerality that I reached with it, that like
mm,
it struck something.
mm,
And I feel myself like I'm like reaching, like the sense of like reaching for an answer, and I feel like it's there, but I'm like not touching it.
mm,
And I want to like try to dredge it up. And like as I'm in this process, I'm like, to me, what this means is that there's something that like I haven't quite wanted to see. There's something that's in my own shadow around this that I haven't investigated. And so something about you asking this question is like pulling it back up. And so right now I could say like no to it basically. I could say, I'm sorry, Anders, that was the complete answer.
yeah,
That's all I've got for you. But I can tell that there's something there because I feel that there's
yeah,
something. And so the practice that I engage in, which I will do right now, is to say yes to it. Is to say yes, like I actually am willing to see what that is. And probably I won't like it, or at least in the beginning, my like normal sense of self won't like it. Like my normal like personality won't like it. But will you let me look for a second?
of course.
Okay. Ugh, I can just feel like it's gonna be like, oh, like no, not that. Oh no.
Mm,
Mm. Mm. I feel like this is like it's like such a non-sexy answer, which maybe is why I don't like it, but I think it's also true, is I got tired of it. I was just tired of it. I was tired of like the things that I did in the eating disorder. I was just tired of it. And I was tired of like the thing that I did when I smoked.
mm,
Like I was tired of that pattern. Like there's this way just It became boring.
Mm.
It became, it just, and I have no idea how to replicate that, you know? Like I have no idea. Besides, like one of the things I do is I'll hit people over the head with their patterns, you know?
Yeah.
Like you see someone, you like if I'm working with someone who's like people pleasing, like I'll
Yeah.
just be an absolute brat until they get to the point where like like you were making me go too far. Like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna people please you there. And I'm like, great, I have succeeded. Because there's a way if you make it obvious enough and bad enough that at some point they're like, no more,
Yeah.
no more.
Yeah. You find the
And so I
limit.
think that's part of, yeah, of like me like tiring people out of their patterns because that and desire are like the only things that have worked for me. So to stoke someone's desire and to demonstrate how futile their patterns are, like how futile the pattern of people pleasing is for getting what they actually want.
Mhm.
And it's like not sexy. Like when I say that, I'm like, that's not sexy, but it does work.
Mm.
Hmm.
What's not the seeing the futility of the pattern?
Yeah, it's not sexy.
It's not.
I don't think it is.
Hmm.
Do you think it's sexy?
I think it's sexy. Yeah,
Oh, cool.
of course, it's sexy. Yeah, it's like a flower. It's like the petals of a flower opening.
Hmm. 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 It's not sexy from the inside.
No.
It's not sexy from the inside. But this is perfect. I think this is a perfect demonstration because I can feel how unsexy it is from the inside. But also when I watch people in it, I'm like, it looks like a flower blooming. It does because something new starts to emerge
Yeah,
and it's amazing. Yeah. But not sexy from the inside. And
that's
that's
a
good to
really
know.
good point.
Hmm.
It isn't sexy from the inside. It feels like ugh, yeah, it just like it elicits disgust.
Yeah, and like
Um,
party was dying
part of you is dying, maybe
or
regret,
already dead.
already dead. Yeah, oh, and I think, but I think almost unless you're just not a sensitive person and you haven't been through it, I think most people seeing that process and seeing it happen in others, it's like one of the most beautiful
It's so beautiful.
moments to witness
It's so beautiful.
of seeing it almost feels like, I mean, sometimes it's a lot more intense, but it feels like there's just a large like heap of rubble,
Hmm.
um just dark, gnarly, uh, filled with just dark black tar, um like a little flower just starts to kind of like blossom right in the middle of it all. The only thing I don't like about that metaphor is that it implies that all that like materials, like that dark shadow materials, isn't isn't serving something. Because I really do think it does serve something. I think when you like that people pleasing thing, like they are getting something out of that, something, and it's not in service of what is most truly authentic and real and desirable, but it's something that has been working. And I think what I
Well,
heard from
you
you
get
is,
to avoid owning your own needs.
yeah,
That would be
yeah,
my uncharitable. Uh,
you get to avoid owning your own needs because your needs are disgusting
from the
within
inside.
that frame.
Yeah, or would never elicit like you would never be able to directly get your needs met.
Exactly.
So instead, you do a complicated maneuver wherein you may or may not get your needs met.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote by Jody Davies. She's a psychoanalyst. And the quote was, like, shame, the opposite of shame isn't pride, it's actually need.
Mm.
So we encounter shame when we have a need in the face of an other who is essentially not giving us what we need, or is like intrusively giving it. And so shame comes in when essentially our needs meet, like there's not no receptivity.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. And often in the work that I'm doing, like I am exactly the person who is not providing what someone is telling me that they need, which I think is what makes the things that I do what you would call fringe. Because and there's something really interesting like in this particular point. Um and I want to like tie this into the idea of like there are like layers of healing or like modalities of different layers, because there's one layer where, and this would be like in traditional therapy, the therapist functions in a role that creates a holding space for the person and basically like in a sense like reparents them, like is the good parent who holds space, who validates, and who makes comfortable and safe the territory that was otherwise too scary to enter.
Yes.
And there's a lot of comfort in that, and the sense like the therapist really holds the parental role
Yes.
and holds more responsibility
Mm-hmm.
than whoever they're working with.
Yes.
And like the work that I'm doing is like at a different, like there's a different set of assumptions and a different like cosmology that I'm working with. And I don't know that it works for everyone, you know?
Yeah.
But the people who it works for, well, you know, will come to work with me and it works in that way. And it's basically the sense that the way that I interact with you calls forth something in you. And so in the traditional therapeutic modality, the way that the therapist is showing up will like call forth the child in the person or call forth the patterns
Mm-hmm.
formed in childhood
Yes.
so that they can be addressed, so that they can be nourished, and so that they can be given that which they needed but weren't. And in the way that I work, my cosmology is a little different.
Yeah.
And it may be that people graduate from that level and then work with me. That's cool. Or people are drawn to the way that I work in a different way or for a different reason. But the way
Yeah.
that I work is much more oriented towards the person I'm working with is like already an adult. And this is because I literally work only with adults. I personally do not work with children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still all of that material from childhood inside each person.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I can orient towards in a person is towards their adultness and towards their capability and towards like their own the safety that they can already provide to themselves and cultivating that. So instead of me providing the security, because I'm not providing security, I'll provide techniques, provide guidance, provide practice spaces, I'll provide invitations, you know, but I'm not providing safety. And the reason for that is because at the level that I'm working, the place that safety comes from is your own sense that your experience is okay for yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm the one going in there, it's that whatever arises in me is okay. Like I already give permission for what's here to be here. I already give permission for the fact that there is anger in me, for the fact that I'll have like sexual attraction to various people, to the huge variety of like my own reactions to life, and to the
Mm.
totality of that, to the shadow material, to all of it. And that's where like safety comes from. That safety comes from my own willingness in like a titrated way. It's not like it happens all at once, but my own willingness to say yes to whatever it is that is arising in me. instead of imposing a lot of internal rules about what I am or am not allowed to do or say based on my childhood experience with my parents or based on other like formative experiences that kind of trained me on these simple rules that are often like aren't relevant any longer.
Well, beautifully said. I think that's capturing kind of like it's getting very close to what I think some of our discussions have been moving towards of the sort of difference between how a standard therapeutic healing model, which there are so many, so I don't think there exists such a standard, but I think many developmental focused therapeutic models, I'll call them, will focus on, okay, like what is the developmental age of this client that I'm working with?
Mhm.
Right now, there's so much wounding maybe around like 4 years old or something. And so we need to kind of tailor how we talk, how we act to a very young child, like almost like a 4-year-old. I'm working with a 4-year-old
Mhm.
because so much is essentially, I don't know if they would frame it this way, but a lot of their own desire and wants and
Mhm.
life energy is trapped there in that kind of holding pattern.
Mhm.
And I think where that would differ from you, and you just said this, but is you kind of have this assumption that there is a bigness that's already there, and
Mhm.
and you're kind of you're speaking to that,
Mhm.
and then you know, in a way, the holding pattern starts to kind of shake. It starts to
Mhm.
kind of open up, and
Mhm.
for some people that can be terrifying
Mhm.
because then it can feel like that original uh, time in your life where you had to close down and shut off to life, that original kind of closing,
Mhm.
you kind of then encounter it. And so
Mhm.
it can feel like a death, or it can
Mhm.
feel like this earth shattering,
Mhm.
reality shattering experience.
Mhm.
And that does make me think of like, when is it appropriate to not speak to the bigness of somebody?
Mhm.
Or I don't know what to call it. I think bigness is a
Mhm.
good word for it, or not to
Mhm.
speak to what most truly matters to them,
Mhm.
and when
Yeah,
to get
it's
small.
that's a question that I ask myself every day. And like the people who really work with me know that I do both.
Yeah, I get the sense you.
Like and and I like to be very transparent about these things. And so on one hand, the way that I'm orienting is right now with this person who I'm paying attention to, who I'm working with, what is most likely to invite and encourage their ongoing largeness. And sometimes that's being hit over the head with how painful the situation is that you've created for yourself. And
Mm,
sometimes it's just really owning like the heartbreak of it or the
mm,
pain of it.
mm.
And those both of those can immediately move you in the direction of your own expansion. And so a lot of it is that sense of like what will give more space for whatever is in this human to move? What will give it a little more freedom to have the space that it needs? And I'll take my best guess and I'll try that. And you get immediate feedback. You get
Yeah,
immediate feedback when you try something, and then you navigate based on that.
yeah.
But it's that dance, that ongoing dance of like what will support this person most deeply based on my own sense, my own best guess. Which like it feels so vulnerable for me. Like this process is so vulnerable for me because that's like all I have to go on is my best guess. It's not like I have some like magical magic wand, you know?
Mm, mm,
I just have like a lot of training and like
mm,
my
mm.
best guess. And that's very terrifying, actually. Like I'm smiling because like it's terrifying. It's
Can you s-
very terrifying.
can you say more about like what's terrifying about it?
There's this way that like we are so much more malleable than we think. Like that each of us is so much more malleable than we understand. And most of us have very strong patterns that we orient the world with. And those patterns tend to give us pretty consistent feedback. And the consistent feedback that we get from the world then like informs our sense of self. This is my model, or one of them. And if I change what I'm doing and I start getting different feedback, that will change my sense of self.
Mm,
And how we each react when our sense of self gets disturbed.
mm,
Like this is why, like, as much as I like do my like shaking and jostling, I also do a lot of like steadying, steady, steady, steady. Because without that, it's just chaos. And
yeah,
like we don't just need chaos.
no, exactly.
But that's why it's terrifying, because it creates this malleability that then needs a new shell. And to build that new shell is a very delicate process. It's very delicate. And I feel very aware of like both how necessary and how delicate that process is. It's like psychological surgery. It's like
Yeah.
sense of self surgery or something like that. And I've
Mm,
done it for myself, and I've had other people do it for me. And so I'm thoroughly aware of both, like, at least for me, the necessity of it and the strength, but also like how vulnerable and how scary it can be in that in between.
it's interesting because I think seeing the way you work and other teachers I've had who work in a more like I don't know exactly what to call it, but you know, it's almost as if the focus isn't on the past, and it's not even necessarily on the future. It's like just
Mhm.
like a full dose of right now. And
Relentless embodiment.
relentless embodiment of right now. And how can you be? And if you're in a pattern, it's impossible to be now.
Mhm.
It's impossible.
Well
Um,
said.
and I think some people are so, and this is where the cultivation, like the self-cultivation of the practitioner isn't just like a preference. It's like required. You need to have been through the psychic surgery, so to speak, to do this kind of work for others. Um, but I think standard therapy, and this isn't true for like a lot of therapists do this kind of work, but I don't think the average therapist does. I think that's where change can only happen is in that right nowness and seeing what comes up in response to that
Mhm.
and being able to meet that fully
Mhm.
and stay true to yourself, stay true to what matters most and not kind of collapsing inward. Um,
Mhm.
but I think of therapy, which is a lot slower, and it's almost like, you know, you meet the client and you get like an inventory. And I know what you're doing isn't therapy, so I want to make that clear. But um, this is just where I come, my world where I come from. But it's kind of like let's get an inventory of your life and all this thing happened to you when you were 5 years old,
Yeah.
and let's focus on that now.
Mhm.
And then it's very easy to get into your descriptive mind or like your rationalization of the current moment and linking it to the past, which I think can sometimes be really helpful
Mhm.
so that you don't lose it when like you have this very intense experience. coming into the fullness of now.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but there's that balance, and I think that's what you're talking about. And I find myself struggling with of I see you fully right now, and I can tell you that crust isn't needed. And if that crust wasn't there, like you would be so happy. Like it would be so amazing, so beautiful. Um,
Yeah.
and seeing the terror of that, seeing the terror of actually moving into that, both in my own life, but also seeing it in clients. Yeah, and there's a balance of like being in the fullness of right now and like actually speaking from that place and like yeah, and like actually maybe still staying in that place, but moving and playing the sort of mind game of staying the same for security's sake. Like I need to know, like I just need to do this game so I know that I'm okay. Um, I know that like that you that you're not gonna hurt me or I'm not gonna self-destruct here. There's just like there's a balance I heard from a therapist, pretty well-known therapist, the creator of PSIP, Saj Razvi, and he said there's a balance here between going to the nightmare, but then also bringing solution to the nightmare. So it's not just nightmare, it's not just chaos. There's also some like relationship that is showing there's a different way. You don't just have to go back into the nightmare again and again. And there's like actually a relation, there's a connection here, in which you're not alone with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like the version that I would do of that is like you break all the rules of their game and then you point out how they're still fine.
Yeah, I like that. I like that
Which
a
is a
lot.
very different technique. It's a very different technique. But you break all the rules. They're like, you need to be this way in order for me to be okay, and you need to be that way in order for me to be okay. And I'm like, well, I'm just gonna keep being me, you know? And then they're like, I am still okay. And in fact, I feel a little more alive than I do before.
Yeah,
And maybe this is
yeah.
too much and I dial it back a little bit, or maybe it's just right. But like, there is this way, like, I still meet them in that, you know, and wherever they've come at the end. But it's a very different process.
It's so different. It's so different, and it's really fun to watch, and experience because it's a little, um, like it's kind of naughty, you know? It's like you're breaking rules,
Mhm,
and you could really, you could really make somebody mad at you
mhm, mhm,
and shatter the frame where it's like, no, I'm mad at
mhm,
you because I don't agree with what you did, and like when they leave.
mhm.
Um, but I think that's where the art is, and I get the sense that you are skillful enough to do that, but it takes a lot of skill to break the rules
Mhm.
of somebody's game.
It does. It does. Okay, this ties into my catchphrase lately is relational liberation, which to me means how do we interact with each other in ways that bring us each more freedom instead of like often what we do is we interact with each other in ways that reinforce each other's patterns. And like we allow the other to function within a narrow range, and we allow ourselves to function within a narrow range in the face of the other.
Yeah.
And so a huge part of this is how do we like let each other be more as long as we're not causing harm? Like I'm not saying like don't stop someone from like going around, you know, being a terrible person. Like if someone's killing people, then no,
Yeah,
right?
running
No.
naked in the street.
But there's a lot of relational range that we can liberate. And so the sense of like widening the range of the rules and like letting myself be more with you and acting in a way so that you feel invited to be more of who you are with me, even the parts of you that you are kind of nervous to bring forward, even in your own self.
Mm.
That's like a really crucial part of this. And there's this way that like in the traditional, in like the therapist client dynamic, the therapist holds a lot out. The therapist holds the parent role and like doesn't bring in the myriad things that are may also be happening with
Hmm.
them. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
like in the way that I'm working, that's very different.
That makes me think of like the word self-disclosure in therapy
Mhm,
speak you may have heard
mhm,
of, but it's essentially how much of yourself, your
mhm,
authentic reactions,
mhm,
do you actually bring to the dyad, the therapeutic
mhm,
dyad?
mhm,
And the opinion and the conceptualization around that in the therapy world is
mhm,
extremely diverse. But
mhm.
my sense of working with you is you disclose quite a bit. I don't know how much you disclose, but if I'm curious, I
I
think you're kind
disclose a lot.
yeah, I was curious. You seem very yourself,
Mhm,
and sometimes we'll have like very authentic reactions that
mhm,
and I'm curious how you if
mhm.
you have thinking if you even think about that or thoughts on that or if it's kind of just intuitive for you how much you actually do self-disclose.
To to me, the most important thing that I'm doing is that I'm freeing myself.
Mm,
And the only reason that I'm leading groups now, that I'm teaching now, is that that is the next way that I need to free myself. That being my individual practitioner is no longer a viable route.
mm,
And so this whole phase for me, which I've been, moving into over the last like 3 to 5 years, this whole phase for me is an act of my own like liberation.
mm,
And so in that, what I'm bringing is how do how do I jostle people's patterns in a way that helps them be looser in them so they can, be the person that would be so wonderful for them and their communities or their
mm.
societies or whatever pocket it is that like
Yeah,
they are here to cultivate.
yeah.
And so if I'm functioning in a way in my groups that's making me smaller,
Mm,
then it has
wow.
they have to be
Yeah.
mutually aligned.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the way that I grow is through bringing awareness to whatever happens. And the easiest way for me to do that is that if I'm willing to embody it, that I'm willing to embody what moves through me so that I become aware of it, so that it stops functioning as an unconscious pattern. And the more quickly I can see what that pattern is doing in me. And so I let it pass through me. I let myself have the reaction. And then I see what's the effect that it has? What is it doing? And there's a way it's very dispassionate. Like I might look very passionate in the expression of it because I'm allowing it to move through me thoroughly. But what I'm actually doing is watching it to
Mm,
see what does that outburst, what does that expression do? What impact does it have? Is that impact in line with like our relational liberation, or is it making it smaller? Like, am I contracting in that expression or am I opening? And
mm,
I have to be more conscious of it in order to find out. That doesn't always mean that I express it. It's not always appropriate to express it. But in a lot of the spaces that I hold and a lot of the people that I spend time with, it's fine. Like I know they
yeah.
have the room for it. And so I
Yes.
just let it go.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Wow. I think that's what sets that I think that above most anything that we've talked about might be what sets your work apart from traditional therapy
Mm-hmm.
because of how much you are actually involved in it,
Mm-hmm.
and how much
Mm-hmm.
of you are actually like you're actually on the line, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and you're and I think therapists would actually say like, well, I that's the work that I do, and I learn um, a lot about myself, but there's an element of themselves that generally it's like you only disclose what would be helpful to your client.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your view is a bit more collective
Mhm.
in the sense that
Mhm.
it's a relational liberation
Mhm.
of, and you are a node in that network that you
Mhm.
are engaging in.
Mhm.
And that makes me think of, we also talked a little bit about the ways in which healers, I'm going to say that really broadly because that could include coaches or therapists, or anybody in a helping role. They might be very good at what they do, like very good, um, but their lives have fallen apart or are falling apart and feel very dead.
Mhm.
I think that that's something to me. I think it's a very common pattern. I've certainly fallen into that at times, and yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious how you have found yourself working in that dynamic.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I know we talked about this a little bit in our prep conversation too, and I love this. And I think I said this before, but like one of the models I love for this is using the drama triangle where you have the rescuer, the perpetrator, and the victim. And in this example, the healer would be the rescuer.
Hmm.
And so if you totally give in to the belief of the rescuer, you are constantly trying to save other people in hopes that it will save you. So it's kind of like a people pleasing thing. You're like
Hmm.
rescuing in hopes that you yourself will be rescued, but then you don't actually get rescued, and then you just burn out, and then you're endlessly hopeless and annoyed, resentful.
Hmm. Yeah.
Fill in the variety of your own things. And so one one way to break that is we call it doing the 180. You do the opposite. And it's one of the simpler ways to investigate and expand a pattern. It's just to do the opposite. And so that's one way. But the thing that I have found most exciting actually, which I think we talked about briefly before, is like how do I actually like apply my skills to myself? Like, how do I point the thing that I'm usually pointing at someone else, like right, like
Mm.
right up way close, where it's way too bright and way too
Hmm.
terrifying because it's way easier to point it at someone else.
Hmm.
And I know that if I do that, I'm gonna be sad and dead inside because like I'm the center of my experience. Like I'm the center of my web.
Hmm.
And if I'm not dismantling, uh deconstructing, shining light on, reassembling, and like in various ways investigating what's happening over here, then I will always be lost. And so there's even, it's so funny because I've literally had the thought like, wow, I do such good things for other people and like they like it so much. Like I wish I had someone like me around. And then I'm like, I'm literally around myself all the time. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, what the am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah.
Okay, I can just what the hell am I doing with myself that is so much less exciting than whatever I'm doing with other people?
Yeah.
And like how do I show up with myself in a way that I'm like, this is great. I love being this person.
Yeah. Isn't it funny
And
too?
that
I wish I had
go
me
ahead.
around.
But and you can, but you're not. And so that's just a new pattern
Yeah.
to, investigate. But the
Yeah.
other piece of that is like, how do I say this? Basically, like, how do I show up in a way that enlivens me? And if someone wants to pay me to do something in particular, they can pay me and I'll do something in particular. Like, if
Mm.
you want to pay me $200 an hour to sit there and like nod, I
Hmm.
will do that. I can reflect to you. If you want to
Hmm.
pay me $200 an hour, I will reflect to you. Okay, fine.
Hmm.
But like if you're not paying me to do something specific, like I'm going to be doing the thing that brings me the most joy.
Hmm.
And in very surprising ways, there are a lot of middle areas there where what I'm doing that brings me the most joy, especially if I'm doing it in a contextually attuned way, will actually really invigorate the people around me.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
It is amazing. And it's making me see the ways in which, like, I'm even more strongly of the opinion that what separates the kind of work you're doing from traditional therapy is the um the symmetry of the relationship. Because
Mm,
therapeutic relationships are asymmetrical. Um, and there's a function to that in the sense that, I mean, the therapist isn't going to show up and you likely won't know about the therapist's shadow stuff. Like it'll show its head and it might have therapeutic functionality, but um, generally, and there's a spectrum to this between how much of a real person you're going to be versus how much are you just like this blank screen or mirror. Um, so within that spectrum, though, I think if you kind of fall on the spectrum of not disclosing yourself to the client,
mm,
and you are a good therapist, so to speak, and you find that, like, in my therapy sessions, I'm like, that's who I want to be. I'm the best person. I'm the best version of myself.
mm,
And then when I go home, I'm miserable. I start drinking. I'm depressed. Um, what gives? And I think what it is like not like somehow just using that 50 to an hour container dyad space to really let yourself like just fully be.
mm,
And then when you're done, it's just like turning that off or whatever that means.
mm,
And it's like, well, that wasn't really me. That was me if I didn't show my full self.
mhm,
If like my full self was there,
mhm,
then it'd be it'd be bad. It'd be gross, disgusting. And so there's a way in which that asymmetrical relationship doesn't allow for really deep, really immediate, full relational encounters.
mhm,
And I think the sense of freedom that's possible will be limited.
mhm. Yeah, there's kind of like in my work there is a mobility, but the mobility is also limited by skill. And so can I use the example of like some of the ways that we interacted a
Yeah,
few weeks ago? Is it okay?
yeah.
So one of the things that we were playing around with is like how do you look at someone and see the spot where they hurt and either like love them in it in a way that like they can heal from or like show it to them in a way that they can't ignore so that they stop recreating that hurt.
Mm,
And so there's this way that I am more willing than average to take the shot.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so the willingness to take the shot is basically what establishes the relation.
yeah,
And in the work that I do, it is very, like someone can take a shot at me that if it's a really good shot, like they are holding it. Like
yeah,
I'm out of the game,
yeah,
And I'll be real about that, right?
yeah.
But most of the time, the people who are working with me, they're not willing yet. They're still
Right.
training, right?
Yeah,
So they're
exactly.
trying to take
You,
shots at
you you
me.
give the opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, but it's still like this because they're not doing it. But if they start doing it, and if they're really doing it, then it can absolutely
Well,
end up
exactly. That
like this,
that's
or
my
even
point.
like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
That's my point exactly, is that you are engaging in a way, the way that you call people forth is in such a way that there is an invitation and a
Hmm.
permission implicit
Hmm.
in the way that you
Hmm.
act that
Hmm.
is telling people you can meet me like on this level.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not I'm not above you in this.
Hmm.
Um, which I think is generally it's very sensitive in therapy to do that.
Hmm.
Um, there is a sense of guardedness, like a sort of guardedness to keep the container
Mhm.
safe. It's like if too much of
Mhm.
myself came in. And I
Mhm.
think there's truth to that, and for
There
some,
is truth to that. Yeah.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
certainly I can think of my own therapist in my life or my own experience as being a therapist where if I were to show up authentically and fully, it would have been unhelpful. It would have actually
Yeah.
not been aligned with in the service of like I like what you're saying, like with relational liberation in the sense that it would have made it both people small. It would have
Mhm.
kind of made us
Mhm.
both
Mhm.
kind of collapse.
Mhm.
And I know when it happens. I know even when I do self-disclose and it's like, oh, what was I doing? Like I was doing that because I wanted security. I
Mhm.
wanted to feel safe.
Mhm.
Or I was doing that because I was scared or I felt uh, embarrassed or something.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's really helpful to consider these as kind of like two different beasts.
Hmm.
Like there is something that is the dyad where one person holds space for another, and like that's okay. And to see like what are the benefits of that? What are the strengths? And what are the weaknesses? What are the drawbacks?
Hmm.
And then in this other thing that I'm doing, which is clearly different in a variety of ways, just to see it as a different thing. It's like a different meditation
Yes.
technique.
Yeah, I like
And so
that.
to see like what does this do? What are the effects of this? What are the drawbacks of this? What are the strengths of it? And then to choose your practice based on that, I think quite lucid.
Quite lucid. Yeah.
Mhm.
What's the other beast? What should we call it? So there's the hold
That's a
space piece.
great question.
I want to know what that piece is so badly. That beast,
Yeah, it's
rather.
like something more dynamic, right? Something a little more emergent. It's definitely like fuller, like it's there's a certain role fluidity that
Yeah.
is markedly different,
Like space
but there's
dance.
still space dancing.
Yeah.
What did you say? Do you say
Yeah, I said
space
space.
dancing?
Space dancing.
I'm thinking like outer space.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I've just made up names for it because I don't have names. Like
Yeah.
the generic name for like the space that I hold on Fridays, I'm calling like relational cultivation. But yeah, I don't have a, we should
Well, that's
name it, huh?
yeah. It's like it's direct and it communicates what it is. I feel like we're up in the like abstraction, like the
Hmm.
clouds.
Hmm.
Um,
I'd be excited to have a name for it.
yeah, I would too. I think it's kind of like it's like really pretentious, but it's kind of like Martin Buber's like I thou relationship.
Mhm.
There's a you might not be familiar with this, but there's a conversation between Carl Rogers, this
Mhm.
big therapist, and
Mhm.
Martin Buber,
Mhm.
philosopher, poet, um, and they kind of have this conflict, and I think it's this exact conflict
Mhm.
that we're talking about right now,
Mhm.
as it's
Mhm.
clicking in my head right now, is
Cool.
Carl Rogers is saying like, no, we're doing the same thing, you and I. Like I
Mhm.
am in these I thou relationships where there's
Mhm.
this sort of immediacy, there's like this immediate presence of me and you rather than me and some object of projection or um, of like use.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Martin was like, no, you're not. Like you're not doing that because your relationships will always be asymmetrical,
Mhm.
whereas um, mine can happen with anybody, anywhere.
Mhm.
It's not well, it was more so mine can happen where the relationship is symmetrical,
Mhm.
where both people have skin in the game, so to speak. Something's
Mhm.
on the line for both of them.
Mhm.
Um, I may have butchered that, but I think that that's the
No, no,
difference between
yeah. You know,
holding
it's making, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that's the difference between holding space and this unknown thing we haven't named.
Hmm. I want to serve as another perspective from which to look at this, which would be like each of us have very unique paths. We have very different patterning, and there are different things that we're drawn to, different things that we desire, and different states that we love to hold. And so like the kind of person who is called to be in this this gentle, accepting, like clarifying, holding role, like for some people that will be deeply nourishing. And there will be so much beauty in doing that for someone else, and the people that they work with will benefit greatly from that.
Mm,
And like I can do that, but it's not like my favorite. It's not like the place that I get so excited, because the place I get so excited is in that like emergent dance. Like the
mhm.
emergent dance of like that relational, this very like embodied, spontaneous sense of like where can we go and what can we
Yeah.
explore? And that's because of me, because of the uniquenesses of me, because of the strengths that I gained through the unique challenges or personal challenges of my childhood. And so like for me to take all of those, some of the skills that I didn't choose to learn and other skills that I've chosen to learn, and channel them into something that's beautiful to me. And this is
Mhm,
what it is. Like my groups are an example of that thing, or my first
mhm,
take at that thing that's beautiful to me. And that we can look at it from the perspective of like therapy or healing, but we can also just look at it from the perspective of like, what kind of human are we like deeply called to be? And how do we want to show up in this world? Like, what will most enliven us? And that just might look different. And it's good because we need variety. We need that variety.
yeah. Yeah. Well said.
And please evolve the therapeutic modality in a way that will be best for all people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that what you're articulating is it's it's a way of being in the world. It's a way of
Mhm.
life
Mhm.
that is not enclosed to a specific dyad where it's allowed. If that's kind of what I'm
Mhm.
hearing,
Yeah,
it's a
totally.
way in the sense that and that's how it's collective, in the sense that
Mhm.
I'm doing this wherever I go, including when I'm alone with myself.
Mhm. It's not the only thing I do. I spend plenty of time reading novels, spend
I kind of
plenty of
thought that
time
you just went around
dancing,
the
plenty of time
city.
just snuggling with my
Yeah.
partner. Like I spend plenty of time doing other things, and I spend some concentrated, intensive time doing this. A good deal of concentrated, intensive time doing this, or thinking about this, or figuring out like, how does this work in the world? How can I create something that invites people and ramps people into like a training into this kind of thing that I want to bring forth?
Mhm.
But also I go for long walks. I love to cook. And I'm not doing this while I'm doing that. When I'm cooking, I'm just cooking, you know? So I just want to like, maybe you may be over reifying my role.
Yeah. So you feel that there is a role that you do step into
Hmm.
when you are acting in this way, when you are being in this way.
Oh, that's a tricky question. But I like how you put it, because it confronts the thing that I was saying.
Yeah.
I would say something like, it takes a certain amount of energy, and I like doing it and I want to do it. And it's like running the car,
Hmm.
and it needs to be balanced. Like I can't do this all the time.
Yeah.
But if I don't do it at all, then I would suffer and be really sad.
Yeah. No, I like that you're saying that because I feel very similarly where there is a balance to being on in that way. It's like sometimes it's actually quite important to be in a way contracted and just like reading a book or just like doing your taxes. Um,
Very grounding.
it's grounding or going on a walk or
Mhm.
watching a movie with your friends.
Crucial, I would say.
Crucial. I would agree.
Yeah. I think all that
Hmm.
to say, like, like I'm not like a magical person. Like I've worked very, very hard to develop certain capacities, and I've worked very, very hard to like accomplish certain states or to recombobulate my perspective.
Hmm.
Like I've really done that, you know? And like I'm still a relatively normal human being.
Well, yeah, I think I mean, if you're not, there's something to look at, right? Because I feel like because if this kind of work is making you start to feel like above,
Mm,
which it
mhm,
can I think it can happen for everybody and does happen for everybody.
mm,
Because there is a way in which it can be isolating, but at the
mhm,
same time, if we start to feel like, well, I am a special kind of person,
mm,
then we can fall into like a lot of traps,
mhm.
and just like that can just be like and just like it's miserable to be that. It has
Yeah,
its own
well,
to
and
grandiosity.
generally, like the if you ever get a whiff of doing something because it makes you feel special, you can be almost positive that that's like a child part of you that's running the show.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
it, that's like one of the easiest ways to find out that like you are actually not in the driver's seat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I have to be special. Child says I have to be special.
Mhm. And you pat it on their head. You're like, yes, you are special.
You are special,
And we're gonna
just
keep doing
everybody
what I
else.
want to do.
Hmm.
Cruel mistress. Sometimes you have to be a cruel mistress.
Hmm.
Assert your dominance.
That's what I do with all my inner children.
Very good. Uh, uh,
Listen, this is a good place to pause, I think.
I was thinking the same thing.